A city thug tries to steal a farmer's truck, shoving the 67-year-old man to the ground and terrorizing his granddaughter at the local market. The punk and his crew laugh as they humiliate the elderly farmer, demanding his keys while other vendors watch in fear. But the calm stranger approaching on horseback isn't just another ranch hand. This is Donnie Yen himself. The thug has no idea he just assaulted an innocent family in front of a martial arts legend who spent decades perfecting the art of destroying bullies. While the criminal waves the stolen keys like a trophy, the Wing Chun master dismounts with deadly grace. The old farmer recognizes his savior and steps back, knowing justice is about to rain down like thunder. The punk's crew keeps sneering, thinking they're facing some washed-up movie star, but they're actually staring at their worst nightmare come to life. What happens when street thugs pick the wrong fight in the wrong small town? Will the bully survive learning why some legends never truly retire? What happened next would terrorize the thug for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's metallic shriek cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30 a.m., but Frank Kowalski was already awake. At 67, his body had long since abandoned the luxury of sleeping past sunrise. Arthritic fingers found the clock's silence button with practiced ease as he swung his legs over the side of the bed, bare feet meeting the cold hardwood floor of the farmhouse he'd called home for 4 decades. Outside his bedroom window, 200 acres of Nebraska corn stood ready for harvest, their golden tassels catching the first hint of morning light. Frank pulled on his work clothes, the same routine he'd followed for more years than he cared to count, and made his way to the kitchen where Martha's coffee pot waited on the counter, a relic from better days when her laughter had filled these rooms. The screen door creaked as he stepped onto the porch, surveying his domain with the satisfaction of a man who'd built something lasting with his own hands. 3 generations of Kowalski sweat had turned this patch of prairie into productive farmland, and Frank intended to keep it that way until the day they planted him next to Martha in the Cedar Falls Cemetery. His beloved 1985 Ford F-150 sat in the gravel driveway, powder blue paint faded but faithful after 180,000 miles of honest work. Old Blue had never let him down, hauling everything from seed corn to Christmas trees, surviving blizzards and droughts with equal stubbornness. Frank ran his weathered hand along the tailgate, checking the tie-downs one final time. The truck bed was loaded with his prize-winning corn and heirloom tomatoes, the fruits of another successful growing season that would grace tables across Cedar Falls by evening. Each ear of corn represented months of careful tending, each tomato a small victory against the uncertainties of farming life. Gravel crunched in the driveway as a red Honda Civic pulled up beside the truck. Beth Kowalski emerged with the energy of youth, her auburn hair catching the morning sun as she stretched after the drive from Lincoln. 22 years old and bright as a new penny, she was the light of Frank's life since her parents' accident had left him as her guardian. "Morning, Grandpa," she called, shouldering her overnight bag. "Ready for Harvest Festival?" Frank's weathered face creased into a genuine smile. "Ready as rain, sweetheart. Just need to get this old truck fired up." Beth climbed into the passenger seat as Frank patted Old Blue's tailgate one last time. "Never let me down yet," he murmured, then joined his granddaughter for the drive to Town Point 40 miles southeast in Omaha. Tony Snake Velasco jerked awake in the back seat of a stolen Lexus, his neck stiff from sleeping at an awkward angle. The truck stop parking lot buzzed with early morning activity, legitimate truckers grabbing coffee and fuel before hitting the interstate, unaware that predators watched from the shadows. Snake stretched his lean frame and checked his phone. 6:15 a.m. Time to get moving. He'd built his reputation on punctuality and violence, 2 qualities that had served him well in Torino's organization. At 35, he commanded respect through fear, his snake tattoo and gold teeth marking him as dangerous to anyone smart enough to recognize the signs. "Rise and shine, ladies," he barked at his crew scattered across 3 vehicles. "We got work to do." Marcus Blade Johnson unfolded from the driver's seat, already alert despite the early hour. At 28, he was Snake's most reliable lieutenant, smart enough to follow orders, ruthless enough to carry them out. Tommy Razor, Lou emerged from a black Escalade, rubbing sleep from his eyes while two other thugs stirred in the third car. Snake gathered his crew around the Lexus's hood, spreading out photographs and handwritten notes like a general planning a campaign. The images showed elderly farmers, pristine pickup trucks, and detailed maps of rural properties around Cedar Falls. "Listen up," Snake said, tapping a photo of Frank Kowalski standing beside his blue Ford. "This old bastard and his pretty truck are gonna make us rich." Saturday farmers market. Same routine as always. Scope the targets, identify the isolated ones, then make our move when they're alone. The plan was simple and effective. Rural folks were soft, trusting, living in a fantasy world where help neighbors and handshake deals still meant something. They made easy marks for professionals who understood that fear was more valuable than friendship. A snake's philosophy was carved in stone. Take what you want from people too weak to stop you. These farmers represented everything he despised: honest work, community values, the naive belief that good always triumphed over evil. He'd spent his adult life proving that philosophy wrong, one victim at a time. "What about the local law?" Blade asked, studying the photos. Snake grinned, revealing his gold teeth. "Sheriff Dalton knows which side his bread is buttered on. Long as we keep it quiet, he keeps it invisible." The convoy of stolen vehicles pulled onto Highway 30, heading toward Cedar Falls and another payday. In the lead car, Snake studied Frank's photograph one more time, memorizing the old man's face. By sunset, that stubborn farmer would learn the price of resistance. The Cedar Falls town square buzzed with the controlled chaos of market day, vendors arranging their wares while early customers browsed the seasonal offerings. Frank's powder. Blue Ford stood out among the newer vehicles like a classic song playing on a modern radio. Familiar, comforting, and somehow more authentic than its surroundings. Beth arranged the produce with artistic flair, her college marketing classes evident in the attractive displays that drew admiring glances from passing shoppers. Ears of golden corn stood at attention in neat rows while heirloom tomatoes gleamed like jewels under the morning sun. "These are gorgeous, Mr. Kowalski," said Ellen Martinez, examining a particularly perfect tomato. "Martha would be so proud." Frank's weathered hands stilled for a moment at the mention of his late wife. "She always said the secret was talking to them," he replied, voice thick with memory. "Plants know when you care." The farmers' market represented more than commerce. It was Cedar Falls' weekly gathering, where neighbors caught up on gossip. Children played between the stalls, and the rhythm of small-town life played out in conversations about weather, crops, and community concerns. But tension lurked beneath the surface camaraderie. Frank noticed other vendors speaking in hushed tones about mysterious visitors offering to buy their farms, about equipment vandalized and livestock poisoned. Fear had crept into their voices, replacing the easy confidence that had once defined their community. Sheriff Rick Dalton made his obligatory appearance, belly straining against his uniform as he nodded to vendors without making eye contact. His discomfort was obvious to anyone who knew him before the corruption had hollowed out his integrity, leaving behind a nervous shell of his former self. Eugene Palmer, the town banker, approached Frank's stand with the reluctant air of a man delivering bad news. His expensive suit looked out of place among the overalls and flannel shirts, marking him as different from the people he'd grown up alongside. "Frank, we need to talk," Palmer said, glancing nervously around the square. "There. Our party's interested in your property. Very interested. It might be wise to consider their offer." Frank's blue eyes hardened with the stubborn pride that had carried 3 generations of Kowalskis through good times and bad. "Not interested, Eugene. That land's not for sale." Palmer's face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been fear. "These aren't the kind of people you want to disappoint, Frank. They're very persistent." Before Frank could respond, Beth grabbed his arm, her voice tight with concern. "Grandpa, look." 3 expensive cars were circling the square like sharks. Around a bleeding swimmer, too new, too clean, too predatory for a farmer's market in rural Nebraska. The vehicles moved with deliberate menace, their occupants studying the vendors and customers with the calculating gaze of apex predators selecting their prey. Frank's veteran instincts kicked in as the cars parked, and 6 men emerged, their city clothes and predatory bearing marking them as outsiders with hostile intent. Snake Velasco moved through the farmer's market like a wolf among sheep, his predatory instincts cataloging every detail of the scene. The elderly vendors, the trusting customers, the complete absence of real security. It was almost too easy. His target stood out immediately. Frank Kowalski's classic Ford pickup gleamed in the morning sun, a rolling piece of Americana that would fetch serious money from the right collector. More importantly, the old man represented everything Snake despised about rural life: dignity, self-reliance, and the stubborn belief that honest work mattered. "Morning, folks," Snake said, approaching Frank's stand with practiced charm. His gold teeth glinted as he smiled, examining the produce with exaggerated interest. "Beautiful truck you got there, Pops. Real classic." Frank nodded politely, his veteran's instincts already on alert. Something about this stranger felt wrong. The expensive clothes, the calculating eyes, the way his companions had positioned themselves around the square like pieces on a chessboard. "Appreciate that," Frank replied carefully. "She's been good. To me." Snake picked up an ear of corn, turning it over in his hands before setting it down without real interest. His attention remained fixed on the truck, and Frank could practically see the dollar signs in the stranger's cold eyes. "Bet she would be," Snake continued, his voice losing some of its false friendliness. "Matter of fact, I might be interested in making you an offer. Cash money, right here, right now." Beth moved closer to her grandfather, her young face showing the first signs of real concern. The other customers around their stand began backing away, sensing the tension building between the two men like pressure before a storm. "Not for sale," Frank said firmly, his arthritic hands gripping the table edge. "Never has been, never will be." Snake's mask slipped further, revealing the predator beneath the thin veneer of civility. "Everything's for sale, old man. Just a matter of finding the right price. Question is whether you want to do this the easy way or the hard way." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, obvious, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Frank straightened to his full height, meeting Snake's gaze with the steady courage that had carried him through 67 years of life's challenges. "I said no," Frank repeated, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd never backed down from a bully in his life. Snake's hand shot out and grabbed the truck keys from the tailgate, holding them up like a trophy. "See, that's where you're wrong, Pops. I'm taking this truck, and there ain't nothing you can do to stop me." The confrontation exploded into violence as Snake shoved Frank hard, sending the elderly farmer sprawling onto the asphalt. Beth screamed and rushed to help her grandfather while the market crowd scattered in panic. "Last chance," Snake snarled, dangling the keys just out of reach. "Sign over the title, or we take it anyway and maybe hurt somebody in the process." That's when the sound of horse hooves on pavement cut through the chaos like thunder before the storm. Every head in the market square turned toward the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves on asphalt. A lone rider approached on a magnificent black stallion, the horse moving with the trained precision of an animal that had bonded completely with its master. The stranger sat with perfect posture despite his casual attire: faded jeans, worn leather boots, and a tan work shirt that had seen honest labor. His weathered face showed Asian features marked by sun and time, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the unfolding confrontation. Snake initially dismissed the newcomer as another local yokel, but something in the rider's bearing gave him pause. The man moved with fluid grace as he dismounted, every motion economical and purposeful. This wasn't some weekend cowboy playing dress-up. This was someone who belonged on horseback. "Seems like you boys are having some trouble with basic manners," the stranger said quietly, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested origins far from Nebraska's cornfields. Snake's crew tensed, recognizing a potential threat despite the newcomer's peaceful demeanor. Their hands drifted toward concealed weapons while maintaining the pretense of casual shoppers. Interrupted by an unexpected development, the stranger approached Frank with genuine concern, helping the elderly farmer to his feet with gentle strength. His touch was careful, checking for injuries without making Frank feel helpless or diminished. "You all right, sir?" The respect in his voice was immediate and authentic, the automatic deference of someone who understood that age deserved honor. Regardless of circumstances, Frank nodded gratefully, brushing dirt from his clothes while Beth hovered anxiously nearby. "I'm fine, thanks to you." Snake sneered at the display of courtesy, his urban sensibilities viewing respect for elders as weakness rather than virtue. "Walk away, cowboy. This ain't your business." The stranger straightened slowly, meeting Snake's gaze with steady calm. When he spoke, his voice carried quiet authority backed by absolute confidence in his ability to enforce his words. When 6 grown men threaten an elderly gentleman and his granddaughter, it becomes everyone's business. The market fell silent, except for the soft snorting of the black horse and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Lines had been drawn in the dust of Main Street, and everyone present understood that violence was now inevitable. The Snake's hand moved toward his concealed knife, but something in the stranger's eyes made him hesitate. This wasn't fear, this was calculation. The tension crackled like electricity before a thunderstorm as Snake's crew moved to surround the stranger. Market vendors and customers had retreated to form a wide circle around the confrontation, their faces showing the mixture of fear and fascination that accompanies the prospect of violence. The stranger remained perfectly calm, hands relaxed at his sides, but his positioning shifted with subtle precision. His weight balanced evenly on both feet, ready to move in any direction. This wasn't the stance of a weakened warrior. This was someone who'd spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. "I asked you a question, cowboy," Snake snarled, his gold teeth glinting in the morning sun. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The man's response came without hesitation or bravado. "Name's Donnie." Tommy Razor. Lou went pale as recognition hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened with genuine terror as he grabbed Snake's arm urgently. "Boss," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "That's Donnie Yen, the kung fu guy from the movies." Snake laughed dismissively, but the sound carried a nervous edge as he noticed his subordinate's genuine panic. "You're telling me some washed-up movie star thinks he can take on 6 professionals?" Donnie made no move to correct the misconceptions or defend his reputation. His silence spoke louder than any boast, the quiet confidence of someone who'd proven himself in real combat rather than staged fights. "Teach this movie star a lesson," Snake ordered, his voice cracking slightly as doubt crept into his bravado. 2 thugs rushed Donnie simultaneously, their street fighting experience telling them to overwhelm opponents with numbers and aggression. They'd used this tactic successfully against ordinary citizens who froze when faced with violence. What happened next defied their understanding of how fights worked. Donnie's response was lightning fast and devastatingly precise. His Wing Chun training exploded into motion, simultaneous blocks and strikes that used the attacker's momentum against them. The first thug's punch was redirected into his partner's face, while Donnie's counterattack collapsed the second man's knee. In under 10 seconds, 2 professional criminals lay unconscious on the asphalt, while their targets stood in the same relaxed position, barely breathing hard from the exertion. "Like I said," Donnie repeated quietly, "basic manners." Snake stared in shock at his fallen crew members, his confidence evaporating like morning mist. This wasn't supposed to happen. Farmers were supposed to be easy targets, not legendary martial artists in disguise. The remaining thugs backed toward their vehicles, suddenly eager to be anywhere else. Snake's remaining crew helped their groaning companions toward the stolen vehicles, their earlier swagger replaced by nervous glances at the man who'd just dismantled 2 professionals without breaking a sweat. The leader's gold teeth no longer gleamed with predatory confidence. Now they chattered slightly as he processed what he'd witnessed. "This ain't over, old man," Snake called to Frank while backing toward his Lexus. "You cost me today, but tomorrow's another story." Donnie made no move to pursue the retreating criminals, instead focusing his attention on Frank and Beth. His priorities were protection rather than punishment, healing rather than vengeance. Frank brushed dirt from his flannel shirt, his dignity intact despite the rough treatment. "Can't thank you enough, son. Don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." "Happy to help, sir," Donnie replied, examining Frank's scraped palms with the practiced eye of someone who'd treated his share of injuries. "Might want to clean these cuts when you get home." Beth stared at their rescuer with barely concealed amazement, struggling to reconcile the gentle man tending her grandfather's wounds with the devastating fighter who'd just demolished 2 attackers. Her journalism major's curiosity warred with her grandfather's Midwestern politeness about prying into personal matters. Other vendors approached cautiously, their faces showing mixtures of gratitude and relief. Jim Hartwell spoke for the group, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he extended them to Donnie. "Those boys been bothering folks around here for weeks," the elderly farmer said. "Police won't do nothing about it. You're a godsend." Word spread quickly through the market crowd about the stranger's identity, but Donnie deflected questions about his Hollywood past with gentle firmness. His focus remained on the present moment and the community's immediate safety. Frank studied his rescuer with the shrewd eye of someone who'd spent decades judging character. "Buy you a cup of coffee? Least I can do after what you did for us." Donnie glanced at his horse, then back at Frank and Beth. Something in the old farmer's genuine gratitude resonated with him, the authentic connection he'd been seeking during his years of wandering. "Coffee sounds good," he agreed, at T. Martha's Diner. The trio found a corner booth where they could talk without drawing too much attention. Frank ordered pie to go with the coffee, insisting on treating the man who'd saved his granddaughter from potential harm. "Mind if I ask why you helped us?" Frank said eventually. "You don't know us from Adam." Donnie looked out the window at his horse, then back at Frank's weathered face. "Been working ranches for 3 years now, sir. Looking for peace, I guess. But sometimes peace requires a fight." Snake's hands trembled with rage as he speed-dialed his boss, the stolen Lexus eating up highway miles while his unconscious crew members groaned in the back seat. The humiliation burned worse than any physical injury. He'd been made to look like an amateur in front of his own men. The phone rang twice before Mickey, the hammer, Torino answered from his luxury suite at the Omaha Marriott, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to receiving only good news from his subordinates. "This better be worth interrupting my breakfast," Torino said, his Italian leather shoes clicking against marble floors as he paced near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Snake swallowed his pride and delivered the devastating news. "We got a problem, boss. That farmer you wanted pressured? He's got protection now. Some kung fu movie star named Donnie Yen." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Snake to wonder if the connection had dropped. When Torino finally spoke, his voice carried deadly quiet that made Snake's blood run cold. "You're telling me that one washed-up actor just cost me millions of dollars?" Snake tried to explain, but Torino's fury erupted like a volcano. This wasn't just about intimidating an elderly farmer anymore. This was about a massive development project worth more than most people saw in their lifetimes. The truth spilled out in Torino's rage. Cedar Falls sat on the projected route for a new interstate highway, information obtained through carefully placed bribes in the state transportation department. He'd been systematically buying farmland through shell companies for pennies on the dollar, then planned to sell to the state for enormous profits once the route was officially announced. Frank Kowalski's 200 acres were the final piece of the puzzle. Without his property, the highway would be rerouted and Torino's investment would become worthless cornfields rather than prime commercial real estate. "I don't care if you have to burn down half the county," Torino snarled into the phone. "That old bastard will sell, and your movie star friend will learn what happens to people who interfere with my business." Snake's confidence began returning as he absorbed his boss's commitment to the operation. "How many men you want me to call in?" "All of them." This just became personal. Meanwhile, back in Cedar Falls, Donnie walked Frank and Beth to their truck as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The first raindrops splattered against the windshield as Frank made an unexpected offer. "Got a guest room if you need a place to stay," Frank said gruffly. "Honest pay for honest work, if you're interested." Donnie considered the proposal, studying Frank's weathered face and Beth's hopeful expression. Something about their genuine warmth appealed to him after years of superficial Hollywood relationships. "Might be nice to work with my hands instead of my fists for a while," he admitted that as they shook hands. None of them noticed the black sedan across the square, its occupant photographing their every interaction for Torino's intelligence files. Monday morning arrived with deceptive tranquility. Donnie woke before dawn in Frank's guest room, the first real bed he'd experienced in months of wandering from ranch to ranch. Muscle memory from decades of discipline pulled him from sleep at 5:30 a.m., his body automatically preparing for the day's challenges. Frank was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing in Martha's old percolator. The two men shared breakfast in comfortable silence, each respecting the other's need for quiet contemplation before facing whatever the day might bring. "Sleep all right?" Frank asked, studying his house guest over the rim of his coffee cup. "Better than I have in years," Donnie admitted, surprised by the truth of it. "Thank you for the hospitality." Beth joined them as morning light painted the kitchen walls golden, her youthful energy a bright contrast to the men's careful assessment of potential threats. She'd spent the night researching Donnie's film career on her laptop, but respected his obvious desire for privacy about his Hollywood past. The day passed in honest labor that satisfied Donnie's soul in ways that staged combat never could. He mended fence posts with methodical precision, fed livestock with gentle efficiency, and repaired farm equipment using skills learned during his years of seeking authenticity through manual work. Frank worked beside him, sharing knowledge accumulated through decades of agricultural experience. Their conversation flowed naturally between practical matters and deeper philosophy, two men finding common ground despite vastly different backgrounds. "You've got good hands for this work," Frank observed, watching Donnie adjust attractors, timing with mechanical intuition. "Feels right," Donnie replied simply, wiping grease from his fingers. "More real than anything I did in front of cameras." As evening approached, Sheriff Dalton's patrol car appeared in the driveway, dust clouds announcing trouble. The lawman's nervous demeanor and avoiding eyes told Frank everything he needed to know about the news he was bringing. "Got some reports I thought you should hear about," Dalton said reluctantly, his uniform wrinkled and his face showing the strain of divided loyalties. Three more farm families had been visited since Saturday's confrontation. Equipment vandalized, livestock poisoned. Subtle threats delivered by men who disappeared before authorities arrived. The pattern was unmistakable, systematic harassment designed to break community resistance. That Frank's jaw tightened as he realized his defiance had brought danger to his neighbors. Torino's convoy of black SUVs rolled into Cedar Falls like an occupying army, their tinted windows and out-of-state plates marking them as outsiders with hostile intent. 15 hardened criminals had answered his call for reinforcements, men whose loyalty was purchased with cash and maintained through fear. The abandoned grain elevator outside town provided perfect headquarters for their operation. Multiple exits, clear sight lines in all directions, and enough space to house vehicles and equipment away from prying eyes. Torino supervised the setup personally, his expensive suit incongruous among the industrial decay. "This is what happens when you try to do things quietly," he told Snake, gesturing toward the assembled firepower. "Sometimes you need to make noise to get people's attention." Maps covered makeshift tables, while weapons were distributed with military precision. This wasn't random intimidation anymore. This was systematic warfare against a community that had dared to resist corporate pressure. Snake's jaw still ached from his encounter with Donnie, but his confidence returned as he watched professional killers check their equipment. "What about the movie star? What about him?" Torino's voice carried deadly indifference. "He's one man. We're 20. Do the math." Meanwhile, Donnie noticed increased surveillance around Frank's property. Vehicles that appeared briefly, then disappeared, strangers asking casual questions. At local businesses, the subtle signs of reconnaissance that preceded serious action. "They're gathering intelligence," he told Frank over dinner. This morning was just the beginning. Beth looked up from her laptop, where she'd been researching similar land grab operations in other states. "It's happening everywhere. Small communities, pressured to sell by shell companies with connections to organized crime." Frank's hands clenched around his coffee cup. "My neighbors don't deserve this because I'm too stubborn to sell." "It's not about stubbornness," Donnie said quietly. "It's about principle. Some things shouldn't be for sale." That night brought the first serious escalation. Frank's prize bull was found dead in the pasture, clearly poisoned by someone who'd climbed the fence under cover of darkness. The animal had been with the family for 8 years, raised from a calf that Beth had bottle-fed during summer visits. Beth knelt beside the massive corpse, tears streaming down her face, while Frank's hands shook with rage and grief. The bull represented more than livestock. It was family history, genetic legacy, the future of his breeding program. Donnie placed a calming hand on Frank's shoulder, feeling the old man's fury like heat from a forge. "This is about more than your truck now. They're trying to break your spirit." Wednesday morning found Donnie riding fence lines on his black stallion, checking for signs of intrusion while surveying the broader tactical situation. The Hartwell Farm smoldering barn came into view first, smoke still rising from the overnight arson that had destroyed decades of accumulated equipment and memories. Jim Hartwell sat on his porch steps with his head in gnarled hands, the 72-year-old farmer looking every one of his years. His wife's medical bills had already strained their finances to the breaking point, and insurance wouldn't cover the full replacement cost of his destroyed livelihood. They came around midnight, Hartwell said without looking up, poured gasoline everywhere and lit it up like the 4th of July. Sheriff says it was probably electrical, but we both know better. Donnie dismounted and sat beside the broken man, offering silent companionship rather than empty platitudes. Sometimes presence mattered more than words, and Hartwell needed to know he wasn't facing this alone. Bank called this morning, Hartwell continued, his voice hollow with defeat. Loans due in full by Friday, or they foreclose. 30 years of payments, and now they want it all at once. The systematic nature of the assault became clear as Donnie gathered information from other affected families. 5 operations had been targeted with escalating violence designed to create maximum psychological impact. Crops poisoned, equipment sabotaged, animals killed. Each attack calculated to cause financial damage while sending unmistakable messages. Sheriff Dalton's absence from the scene spoke volumes about his true loyalties. A real lawman would have been investigating arson as a major crime, but Dalton was nowhere to be found when farmers needed protection. Some folks are talking about selling, Hartwell admitted. Take whatever these city boys are offering and get out before somebody gets killed. Running from bullies never works, Donnie said quietly. They just find new victims. The ride back to Frank's farm revealed additional surveillance. Parked cars with occupants pretending to read newspapers, utility trucks with no visible work being performed, the subtle signs of organized criminal reconnaissance. That evening brought another crisis when Beth announced her intention to return to Lincoln immediately. Her overnight bag sat packed by the door while she argued with Frank about abandoning the farm. This isn't worth dying for, Grandpa, she said, tears streaming down her face. Grandmother wouldn't want you to sacrifice everything for dirt and memories. Frank's stubborn pride warred with his love for his granddaughter, the old man torn between protecting her and protecting the legacy he'd spent his life building. If we're staying, we need to be smart about it, Donnie interjected, his calm voice cutting through their emotional argument. Thursday afternoon transformed Frank's barn into an unlikely war room as Donnie gathered the core resistance group. 6 neighboring farmers joined Frank and Beth around hastily arranged tables covered with maps, photographs, and improvised defensive plans. We can't match their firepower, Donnie explained, his tactical experience evident in every detail of his presentation. But we can use knowledge of terrain and community solidarity to level the field. Jim Hartwell studied the defensive positions marked on aerial photographs of their properties. You really think we can fight back against professional criminals? I think you're tougher than you realize, Donnie replied. You've survived blizzards, droughts, economic hardship. This is just another storm to weather. The training began with basic self-defense principles adapted for agricultural settings. Donnie demonstrated how farming tools could become effective. Weapons, pitchforks as spears, shovels as shields, hay hooks as close combat implements. Fighting isn't about anger, he taught while showing proper stances and movements. It's about protecting what matters most. Beth documented everything on her smartphone, creating instructional videos that could be shared with other threatened communities. Her journalism training proved invaluable in organizing information and coordinating communication networks. The farmers practiced scenarios specific to their likely encounters: home invasions, barn fires, livestock poisoning. Donnie's philosophy emerged through practical instruction. Strength came from unity, courage from conviction, victory from refusing to surrender. Set up safe rooms with multiple exits, he advised. Create communication networks using cell phones and CB radios. Most importantly, shed your victim mentality. You're not helpless sheep waiting for slaughter. As evening approached, Donnie installed motion sensors around Frank's property using equipment purchased from hunting supply stores. The early warning system would provide crucial seconds of advance notice when Torino's men made their inevitable assault. "Why are you really staying?" Beth asked as they tested the alarm system. "You could leave any time and avoid all this danger." Donnie paused in his work, considering his answer carefully. The question touched something fundamental about his search for meaning after years of Hollywood superficiality. "Because some fights choose you," he said finally. "And because you folks deserve better than living in fear." That night, as storm clouds gathered over the Nebraska plains, Donnie made final preparations for the confrontation he knew was coming. Motion sensors armed, escape routes planned, weapons positioned, everything ready for the battle that would determine whether greed or principle would triumph in Cedar Falls. The sensors triggered at 11:47 p.m. as 8 vehicles approached through the cornfields, their headlights cutting through darkness like searchlights hunting prey. Friday night's darkness provided perfect cover for Torino's assault team as they approached Frank's farm in 2 vehicles. 8 professional criminals armed with military-grade weapons expected to find sleeping targets. Elderly farmer, college girl, and one washed-up actor who'd gotten lucky once. Instead, they found themselves entering a carefully prepared battlefield. Donnie had spent hours positioning obstacles and creating tactical advantages throughout the farmyard. Hay bales became mobile cover, agricultural equipment transformed into defensive positions, and his intimate knowledge of the terrain gave him decisive superiority over urban predators operating in unfamiliar territory. The motion sensors triggered at 11:47 p.m., sending silent alerts to Donnie's position in the barn loft. Frank and Beth were secure in the reinforced safe room, protected by steel doors and multiple escape routes. The first attacker died silently, Donnie's Wing Chun precision collapsing his windpipe before he could raise an alarm. The second fell to a perfectly placed strike that severed his spinal cord at the base of his skull. What followed was surgical elimination rather than chaotic combat. Donnie moved through shadows like death incarnate, using farm equipment as both weapons and shields. The tractor became mobile armor, pitchforks became spears, and even simple rope became a garrote in trained hands. 20 minutes later, 8 unconscious criminals lay zip-tied in Frank's barnyard, while their intended victim calmly called Sheriff Dalton to report a break-in. When the corrupt lawman arrived, his reluctance to arrest the intruders confirmed everyone's suspicions about his true loyalties. Beth captured everything on her smartphone, creating evidence that couldn't be buried or ignored. The video would go viral within hours, bringing unwanted attention to Torino's operation. "Seems like you boys got lost," Donnie said mildly as Dalton surveyed the defeated assault team. "Might want to be more careful about trespassing on private property." Dalton's sweating face revealed his panic as he realized the implications of the night's events. His carefully maintained cover was blown, and federal authorities would inevitably investigate. The corrupt sheriff made the arrests with obvious reluctance, knowing each handcuff click brought him closer to his own downfall. Saturday morning brought false hope to Cedar Falls as news of Donnie's victory spread through both criminal and farming communities. Torino's remaining men were demoralized while local farmers felt genuine optimism for the first time in weeks. Frank made the crucial decision to sign his property over to a community land trust, ensuring it could never be sold to developers, regardless of pressure or intimidation. The legal maneuver created an ironclad barrier against future corporate predation. Other farmers followed his example, creating a united front that transformed individual vulnerability into collective strength. Eugene Palmer handled the paperwork with nervous efficiency, his banking experience proving valuable despite his earlier cowardice. Beth livestreamed the signing ceremony on multiple social media platforms, her college connections amplifying the story across networks that reached far beyond rural Nebraska. Hashtag Cedar Falls fight began trending as urban viewers discovered the David versus Goliath struggle in their backyard. The farmers' market became a celebration of community resilience as vendors who'd been terrorized for weeks finally felt safe to operate normally. Frank gave an impromptu speech about standing together against intimidation, his words carrying the authority of someone who'd proven courage under fire. "They thought we were weak because we're old," he declared to applauding neighbors. They forgot that wisdom beats youth and experience defeats arrogance. Donnie prepared to move on, believing his work was finished. He'd given the community back their courage and created legal protections against future threats. His wandering lifestyle called, and other ranches needed workers who understood the value of simple labor. Frank shook his hand with tears threatening to overflow weathered cheeks. You gave us back our dignity, son. Can't thank you enough for that. Beth hugged him impulsively, whispering gratitude that made his chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. Thank you for saving us all. As Donnie mounted his stallion and rode toward the sunset, the scene resembled a classic Western ending. The hero departing after restoring justice, leaving behind grateful citizens who could protect themselves. But Snake and 3 remaining thugs watched from hiding, their hatred burning like acid as they planned revenge against the man who'd humiliated their organization. Saturday night's celebration turned to nightmare at 9:15 p.m. when Beth walked alone to her car after helping Frank clean up from the day's festivities. She was texting college friends about the amazing events when chloroform-soaked cloth covered her mouth and nose. Snake had been waiting for exactly this opportunity, patient as his namesake, while planning the perfect revenge. Beth's unconscious body was bundled into a stolen van before anyone noticed her absence from the emptying market square. Frank discovered her abandoned Honda Civic 20 minutes later, her purse scattered on the asphalt and phone showing half-typed messages that ended mid-sentence. His panicked calls to her number went straight to voicemail as he searched desperately through town. Meanwhile, Torino arrived with his full force, not local criminals this time, but professional mercenaries with military training and equipment that transformed Cedar Falls from peaceful farming community into war zone. The game had changed completely. This was no longer about intimidation or property acquisition. This was about eliminating witnesses and obstacles to a $50 million criminal enterprise that couldn't survive exposure. Beth woke in the abandoned Hartwell mine, her wrists zip-tied to a wooden chair while armed men guarded every exit. The underground complex provided perfect isolation for interrogation and execution, far from any witnesses who might interfere. But Torino's phone call to Frank came at midnight. Beth's terrified voice transmitted first to maximize psychological impact. Grandpa, I'm sorry, I'm so scared. Then Torino's ice-cold professional menace filled the line. You cost me a lot of money, old man. Now you're going to pay the price for that mistake. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Frank and his kung fu protector would come to the mine by dawn, alone and unarmed, or Beth would be dismembered and mailed back piece by piece. Don't test me, farmer, Torino concluded. I've killed better people than you for much less money. Frank's hands shook as he ended the call, his worst fears realized. His stubbornness had brought this horror down on the person he loved most in the world. Outside, storm clouds gathered with unnatural violence, as if nature itself was preparing for the battle that would determine whether evil or good would triumph. In this forgotten corner of America, Frank reached Donnie by cell phone at 12:15 a.m., his desperate call cutting through the night like a blade. 20 miles away, the martial arts master was camping under stars that seemed dimmer now, as if the universe itself sensed approaching darkness. Without hesitation, Donnie turned his stallion towards Cedar Falls and rode hard through moonless countryside. His horse's hooves thundered against asphalt as they covered ground with desperate urgency, man and animal united in purpose. He arrived to find Frank loading his hunting rifle with shaking hands, the elderly farmer preparing for a suicidal rescue mission that would accomplish nothing beyond getting them both killed along with Beth. This is what they want, Donnie said gently, stopping Frank's trembling fingers. For us to act from emotion instead of strategy. Maps of the old mine complex covered Frank's kitchen table as Donnie studied entry points, defensive positions, and tactical possibilities. The underground facility offered numerous advantages to defenders, but also potential weaknesses that could be exploited by someone with proper training. Frank insisted on participating despite Donnie's protests about his age and arthritis. She's my granddaughter. I won't hide while she's in danger, and that's final. Then we do this smart, Donnie agreed, recognizing the futility of arguing with Kowalski's stubbornness. Follow my lead exactly, no matter what happens. At 4:30 a.m., they approached the mine on horseback as requested. Floodlights illuminated the Main entrance where Torino waited with 20 armed mercenaries, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the industrial decay surrounding them. Beth sat tied to a chair in plain view but unreachable, her face showing fear and defiance in equal measure. The sight of his granddaughter's terror sent rage coursing through Frank's veins, but Donnie's calming presence kept him focused. "Drop your weapons and dismount," Torino commanded through a bullhorn. "You have 30 seconds to comply." Donnie met Frank's eyes and nodded grimly. They dismounted and walked forward with raised hands, apparently surrendering to overwhelming force. But Donnie's fingers moved in subtle signals that Frank had learned to recognize. The plan was still in motion, and surrender was just another tactical maneuver in a game where the stakes were life and death. Torino's men searched Donnie and Frank with professional thoroughness before binding their hands with heavy-duty zip ties and forcing them to kneel on the cold mine floor. 20 armed mercenaries formed a loose circle around the captives, their military bearing and expensive equipment marking them as far deadlier than Snake Street thugs. Beth sat 20 feet away, her chair positioned where Frank could see her clearly. Tears streaked her face, but her jaw was set with Kowalski determination that refused to break even under these circumstances. Torino circled his prisoners like a predator, savoring the moment before the kill. His expensive Italian shoes clicked against concrete as he outlined the scope of his operation with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to complete control. $50 million, he said, lighting a Cuban cigar with deliberate ceremony. "That's what your stubborn pride has cost me, old man." Cedar Falls was supposed to be a quiet land acquisition, then development into a major drug distribution hub when the interstate comes through. The criminal mastermind's psychology emerged through his monologue, a control freak who viewed rural communities as obstacles to progress rather than collections of human beings with rights and dignity. His mistake was underestimating both Frank's courage and Donnie's strategic thinking. "But you had to be difficult," Torino continued, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "You and your movie star friend here thought you could play hero and save the day. Now you'll watch each other die and understand what happens to people who interfere with my business." Snake stood behind his boss, his face still bearing bruises from his encounter with Donnie. The thug's eyes burned with personal hatred that went beyond professional obligation. This had become about revenge and wounded pride. "Kill the old man first," Torino ordered, his voice carrying the casual indifference of someone ordering coffee. "Let the girl and the actor watch. Then the girl, slowly. Save Hollywood for last, so he understands the consequences of heroism." A mercenary raised his assault rifle toward Frank's head while Beth screamed through her gag. But as the weapons safety clicked off, Donnie's eyes met Frank's in a moment of perfect understanding. The old farmer gave an almost imperceptible nod, his weathered face showing absolute trust in the man who'd already saved his life once. Whatever plan Donnie had conceived, Frank was ready to play his part, even if it meant sacrificing himself for his granddaughter's chance at survival. Frank suddenly lurched forward with a convincing portrayal of cardiac distress, clutching his chest and gasping for breath as he collapsed sideways. His performance was Academy Award worthy, the perfect mimicry of a heart attack that sent guards scrambling with momentary confusion. In that split second of inattention, Donnie's hands moved with impossible speed. The zip ties had been deliberately loosened during the search through sleight of hand that none of Torino's men had detected. Years of stage magic and martial arts training combined in one fluid motion that freed his bonds. But instead of attacking, Donnie grabbed the nearest mercenary as a human shield, his arm sliding around the man's throat in a perfect blood choke that rendered him unconscious in seconds. The tactical shift was immediate and devastating. Suddenly, Torino's numerical advantage became a liability. "Nobody moves, or your friend dies," Donnie announced calmly, though his hostage was already unconscious from the precisely applied pressure. "And before anyone gets brave, remember that I just took down 8 of your colleagues without breaking a sweat." Torino's fury erupted like a volcano as his carefully planned execution became a hostage negotiation. "You think one human shield changes anything? I've got 19 more men." "But you only have one reputation," Donnie replied, his voice carrying deadly quiet authority. "Shoot through your own man, and word gets out that Mickey Torino sacrifices his crew when things get difficult." How long before your organization falls apart? The psychological warfare was as devastating as any physical assault. Half of Torino's mercenaries were already nervous about facing a legendary martial artist, and now their employer's willingness to protect them was in question. Frank completed his diversion by recovering enough to untie Beth's restraints while attention focused on the standoff. The old farmer's hands shook with adrenaline rather than fear as he freed his granddaughter from her bonds. Behind the cart, Donnie instructed quietly, his hostage providing mobile cover as he maneuvered toward better defensive positions. Stay low and keep moving. Torino split his forces, sending men through the mine's multiple tunnels to flank Donnie's position. The underground complex became a three-dimensional battlefield where knowledge of terrain mattered more than superior numbers. But Donnie had studied the maps carefully during their approach, memorizing every tunnel and chamber. His hostage became a passport through the maze of industrial decay, each step bringing them closer to defensible positions among the mining equipment. This is just delaying the inevitable, Torino called through the darkness. You're one man against 20. Mathematics doesn't lie. Neither does experience, Donnie replied, his voice echoing from multiple directions as he used the mine's acoustics to mask his true position. The abandoned mine became a three-dimensional battlefield as Torino's mercenaries moved through multiple tunnel networks, their military training evident in coordinated flanking maneuvers designed to trap Donnie in a killing field of crossfire. But the underground complex favored defenders who understood its layout. Donnie had memorized every tunnel entrance during his study of the tactical situation, and now that knowledge became the difference between life and death. Wing Chun techniques adapted perfectly to close-quarters combat in narrow passages, where the tunnels constrained movement. Donnie's economy of motion allowed devastating strikes in impossibly tight spaces. Chain punches became unstoppable in corridors too narrow for evasive action. Mining equipment transformed into weapons of opportunity. Conveyor belts provided mobile platforms for rapid repositioning, or carts became shields and battering rams. Heavy machinery created choke points where superior numbers meant nothing. Frank and Beth took cover behind a massive or crusher, while Donnie systematically eliminated threats with surgical precision. Each engagement lasted seconds, a burst of violence followed by tactical repositioning to prevent enemy coordination. He's picking us off one at a time, one mercenary reported through his radio, his voice tight with professional concern. This isn't some washed-up actor. This guy's the real deal. Torino's rage intensified as his expensive mercenaries fell to improvised weapons and martial arts techniques that belonged in movies rather than real combat. The criminal mastermind's worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that one man could defeat his carefully assembled army. Burn him out, Torino screamed into his radio. Use the flamethrowers and smoke grenades. I don't care if we bring down the whole mine. But desperation made him sloppy. The order to use incendiary weapons in an underground facility filled with combustible materials revealed panic rather than tactical thinking. Several of his own men questioned the wisdom of setting fires in their only escape route. Donnie exploited the confusion, using the mercenaries' hesitation to launch a devastating counterattack that left 3 more unconscious and the rest scattered throughout the mine complex. His movements flowed like water through the industrial maze, striking without warning before melting back into shadows. The tide was turning, but ammunition, in the form of improvised weapons and environmental advantages, was running low. Even a master martial artist had limits, and exhaustion was becoming a factor in calculations that had no margin for error. That's when salvation arrived in the form of truck engines roaring in the distance. Frank had been busy during the initial chaos, using his cell phone to contact the farmer network they'd established. Led by Jim Hartwell, 12 armed neighbors stormed the mine entrance just as Donnie's situation became desperate. The sound of diesel engines and shouting voices echoed through the mine shafts as Jim Hartwell led 11 other farmers in a coordinated assault on Torino's outer perimeter. These weren't trained soldiers, but they were fighting for their homes, families, and neighbors with the desperate courage of people who had nothing left to lose. Hunting rifles and shotguns proved surprisingly effective against urban criminals, who'd expected easy targets rather than organized resistance. The The farmer's intimate knowledge of rural tactics, learned through decades of pest control and predator management, translated directly to human combat. "Frank's in there," Hartwell shouted over the gunfire, his World War II Marine training evident in his tactical movements despite his 72 years. "We're not leaving without him." The battle expanded across multiple fronts as Donnie coordinated with the farmers through Frank's shouted instructions. Two forces caught Torino's men in a classic pincer movement, eliminating escape routes while applying pressure from multiple directions. Donnie fought his way toward Beth's position while the farmers systematically cleared the upper levels. His Wing Chun techniques adapted seamlessly to the changing tactical situation, using environmental advantages and superior positioning to overcome remaining mercenaries. The criminal organization that had seemed invincible hours earlier was collapsing, under pressure from ordinary citizens who refused to accept victimization. Torino's expensive soldiers were demoralized and outfought by farmers armed with determination and basic hunting weapons. "Boss, we need to extract," Snake called desperately, as his remaining men fell back toward the mine's deepest levels. "These aren't civilians, they're fighting like veterans." Many of the farmers were veterans, their military service dating back to conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan. Age hadn't diminished their tactical instincts or their willingness to fight. When their community was threatened, with most of his forces eliminated or fleeing, Torino made a desperate gambit. He grabbed Beth and retreated to the mine's original excavation pit, a natural arena 50 feet below ground level with stone walls and only one entrance. "Come down here alone, or I kill her," he screamed, his voice echoing off rock walls as his carefully constructed empire crumbled around him. "Just you and me, movie star. Let's see how tough you really are." Beth struggled against his grip, but Torino's desperation made him dangerous in ways that calculated criminals rarely achieved. This was a man who would rather destroy everything than accept defeat. Donnie didn't hesitate. He descended into the pit for the ultimate confrontation, leaving behind the farmers who'd risked everything to save their neighbors. Some battles could only be fought alone, and this was his moment to prove that legends were earned rather than given. In the mine pit 50 feet below ground, Torino held a pistol to Beth's head while Donnie descended alone into the stone arena. The criminal boss was beyond rational thought, his $50 million empire reduced to rubble by farmers and a Hollywood has-been. "You cost me everything," Torino snarled, his expensive suit torn and stained with dirt and blood. "Now I'm going to take everything from you." He shoved Beth away and drew a combat knife, the blade gleaming under harsh industrial lighting. At 45, Torino was younger, bigger, and armed, but desperation had replaced tactical thinking with raw violence. "Come on, movie star," he taunted, circling like a caged animal. "Let's see if your choreographed fights work in the real world." Donnie said nothing, his silence more intimidating than any boast. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of combat. Each step calculated and purposeful. Torino lunged with the knife, his attack fueled by rage and desperation. But anger made him sloppy, his movements telegraphed and predictable to someone trained in reading body language and timing. Donnie's Wing Chun training exploded into motion. He redirected the knife, thrust with a simple deflection, simultaneously striking Torino's wrist with enough force to numb his entire arm. The blade clattered against stone walls as the criminal's weapon was disarmed in a single fluid motion. What followed was a masterclass in applied martial arts. Torino's street fighting experience meant nothing against decades of disciplined training and philosophical understanding of combat principles. Every punch was blocked and countered. Every grab was escaped and punished. The fight moved across the pit floor with Donnie controlling distance and timing while Torino exhausted himself with increasingly wild attacks. Years of gym workouts couldn't overcome a lifetime of martial arts mastery. Torino's final desperate charge ended with Donnie's palm strike to his solar plexus, precise force that collapsed his diaphragm and sent him crashing into the stone wall. The criminal mastermind slumped to the ground, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. "It's over," Donnie said simply, helping Beth to her feet as Frank and the farmers peered down into the pit. Above them, sirens wailed as honest law enforcement finally arrived to clean up the corruption that had festered in Cedar Falls for too long. Justice had been served by ordinary citizens who refused to accept evil as inevitable. FBI agent Sarah Mitchell arrived with a convoy of federal vehicles as dawn broke over the mine complex. Her 15 years of organized crime experience immediately, recognizing the scope of what had unfolded. The scene resembled a war zone more than a rural crime investigation. The Torino's surviving mercenaries were zip-tied and awaiting transport, while EMTs treated their injuries. Sheriff Dalton sat in handcuffs. Beside his patrol car, his corruption finally exposed through evidence that couldn't be buried or ignored. Jesus Christ, Mitchell muttered, surveying the tactical devastation. One man did all this. Frank emerged from the mine supporting a shaken but unharmed Beth, both of them covered in dust but alive. Behind them, Donnie helped carry Torino's unconscious form toward waiting ambulances, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos surrounding them. The investigation revealed a multi-state criminal enterprise using identical tactics across rural America. Shell companies, corrupted local officials, and systematic intimidation designed to acquire valuable property for development and drug trafficking operations. This goes way beyond Cedar Falls, Mitchell explained to Frank as crime scene technicians. Photographed evidence. Your stand here exposed a network we've been hunting for 2 years. Beth's smartphone videos provided crucial documentation of the entire conspiracy, her journalism training evident in the comprehensive record she'd maintained throughout the crisis. The footage would become evidence in dozens of federal prosecutions. Eugene Palmer's banking records revealed the money trail connecting Torino's organization to similar operations in 6 other states. The corrupt bankers' cooperation in exchange for reduced charges helped federal prosecutors build airtight cases against the entire network. What happens to our land? Frank asked, watching agents process the scene with methodical efficiency. The community trust stands, Mitchell assured him. Federal law protects legitimate property transfers made under duress. Your neighbors' farms are safe. As afternoon approached, the last of Torino's organization was loaded into federal transport vehicles. The grain elevator that had served as their headquarters would become a federal evidence warehouse, its contents documenting years of criminal enterprise. Sheriff Dalton's replacement arrived from the state police, a clean officer with no connections to local corruption. The new lawman's first act was thanking the farmers who'd risked everything to protect their community. You folks did what law enforcement should have done years ago, he said solemnly. This county owes you a debt we can never fully repay. Frank stood with his arm around Beth, watching federal agents dismantle the criminal network that had terrorized his neighbors. The old farmer's weathered face showed satisfaction rather than triumph. Justice served rather than revenge taken. Donnie prepared to slip away quietly, his work finished and his desire for anonymity restored. But Frank caught his arm before he could disappear into the crowd of investigators. 1 month later, Frank's farm had been transformed into something unrecognizable from the isolated operation it had been before the crisis. The barn now housed a community center where neighbors gathered for meetings, meals, and mutual support. Construction crews had rebuilt Jim Hartwell's barn with donations from across the state. The new structure incorporating modern fire suppression systems and security features. The old Marine's tears of gratitude had moved everyone present at the dedication ceremony that a small dojo occupied one corner of Frank's barn, where Donnie taught martial arts to children and adults who wanted to learn self-defense. His philosophy of protection rather than aggression resonated with students who'd witnessed the consequences of both approaches. Fighting is about more than physical techniques, he explained to a class of mixed ages. It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. Beth had deferred her final semester to help coordinate the farm's transformation into a symbol of rural resistance. Her blog documenting the events had attracted national attention, bringing visitors from other threatened communities who wanted to learn from Cedar Falls' example. Property values had actually increased as people learned about the heroic stand against corporate intimidation. Young families were moving to the area, attracted by the community's proven willingness to protect its own against outside threats. Frank had embraced his role as unofficial spokesman for agricultural communities. Under pressure from organized crime, His speeches at Farm Bureau meetings and congressional hearings carried the authority of someone who'd faced down professional killers and lived to tell the story. They thought we were weak because we're old, he told a gathering of Iowa farmers. Facing similar pressures, they forgot that wisdom beats youth every time, and experience defeats arrogance. The legal protections established during the crisis had become a model for other rural communities. Community land trusts, early warning networks, and cooperative defense agreements were spreading across the Midwest like seeds on fertile ground. That evening, Donnie sat on Frank's porch watching sunset paint the cornfields gold while children practiced martial arts forms in the distance. Their laughter carried on evening breezes that smelled of growing things and honest work. Beth joined him with 2 glasses of iced tea, her face showing the maturity that crisis had forced upon her. "You're staying, aren't you?" Donnie considered the question, watching his students demonstrate techniques he'd taught them. "For a while, there's good work to be done here." In the distance, Frank called the children inside for dinner, his voice carrying the authority of a patriarch who'd earned his place through sacrifice and courage. This was what peace looked like, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of people willing to fight for what mattered most. 3 months later, winter had settled over Nebraska with the quiet beauty that only rural landscapes could provide. Snow covered the corn stubble in Frank's fields while smoke rose from chimneys throughout Cedar Falls, each wisp representing families secure in their homes. Donnie's morning routine included checking the farm's perimeter on horseback, but the ritual had evolved from security patrol to peaceful contemplation. His black stallion's breath steamed in the cold air as they moved through countryside that had become home rather than temporary refuge. The transformation was complete, but not finished. Donnie taught martial arts 3 days a week, worked the farm the other days, and had begun writing a book about finding peace through purpose rather than isolation. The manuscript explored themes of service, sacrifice, and the courage required to protect others. Frank had recovered his zest for life with the energy of someone who discovered his true calling late in the game. The farm prospered under their partnership, but more importantly, it had become a pilgrimage site for communities facing similar challenges. Beth returned from college every weekend, bringing friends who wanted to understand the events that had made national news. Her journalism degree would focus on rural issues and corporate intimidation, her life's work inspired by the summer that changed everything. The phone rang that afternoon, interrupting Donnie's work on the book. Frank answered with the easy confidence of someone who no longer feared unexpected calls, his voice carrying across the house as he spoke with visitors from Iowa. "Donnie," Frank called, "got some folks here who need our help. Same situation as we faced, but they don't have anyone to stand with them." A delegation of farmers had driven 5 hours to Cedar Falls, their faces showing the same fear and desperation that had once marked Frank's neighbors. Corporate intimidation, corrupted officials, systematic harassment. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Donnie saved his manuscript and walked to the kitchen where maps were already spreading across Martha's old table. Frank looked at him questioningly, respecting his partner's right to choose his own battles. "What do you think?" Frank asked. "These folks are calling for help." Donnie studied the faces around the table, honest people who'd worked hard their entire lives, now facing forces beyond their understanding or resources. "Some fights chose you." And this was clearly one of those moments. He walked to the mudroom and checked his saddle, then returned with the hint of a smile that Frank had learned to recognize as acceptance of inevitable duty. "Well then," Donnie said, reaching for his coat, "I guess we'd better answer." As he mounted his horse and the delegation followed in their cars, Frank called after him, "You know you'll always have a home here." Donnie waved without turning around, riding toward another horizon where people needed a champion. Some legends never died. They just found new ways to serve justice in a world that would always need heroes willing to stand between the innocent and those who would prey upon them. The black stallion's hooves rang against frozen ground like a promise. Wherever evil threatened good people, there would be someone willing to fight back. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.